Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Superhero Fiction Authors of Color panel. My name is Trish Heinrich, and I will be your last-minute moderator for this panel. I want to have our awesome authors introduce themselves. Cece, why don't we start with you?
Hello, my name is Cece Akeke. I'm the author of the Pantheon Saga series. It's currently 5 books, the 5th one about to launch in a couple weeks, and a novella, and ongoing.
Awesome. Congratulations on your upcoming soon-to-be launch. That's exciting.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Kevin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves to us?
Okay, well, my name is Kevin Sorrell, and I'm the author of the Shadowfox series. I've got 1 book out. I'm actually working on book 2 right now, and I've got a short story prequel for it. So I'm pretty much new to this, but I've got a lot of ideas and a lot of things I want to get to.
Awesome. And for those of you watching who are newsletter subscribers, Kevin wrote our featured book of the month. So that's very exciting.
Oh, okay.
And Eric, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your books?
Eric, my name's Eric Nunnally. I wrote Lightning Wears a Red Cape. That's would be my superhero story. I also have Blood for the Sun and coming in July, All the Dead Men. Any other superhero stories in the pipe? Maybe. Depends on what opportunities may come up. I think I have a pretty solid idea for a sequel to Lightning Wears a Red Cape. So we'll see what happens.
Awesome. All right. Well, starting off, and I'm going to toggle screen. So if it looks like I'm looking off into the distance, that's probably what's going on. So first question, starting off with something kind of fun and light. Who is your favorite Black superhero and why? And whoever wants to take the question, you just dive right in.
I don't mind going first.
Go for it, Kevin.
Favorite Black superhero? I got a few, but I probably would say Static.
Okay.
Static is really close. This is also an inspiration for my character Keisha in my series. I mean, for a lot of folks that have, my first introduction, like most people, or a lot of people, I should say, was the Static Shock cartoon in the early 2000s. And then later I learned about the series through Milestone. And I just always liked the character. I'm a sarcastic type. I like witty comedy is like my favorite type of comedy. Mm-hmm. So anybody that can turn a good phrase, and get one up on a bad guy, I automatically like. So that was probably, I would say, my favorite. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'd say for me, for myself, I would say that I was a huge fan of Bishop when he first came out on X-Men. And it's interestingly enough, even though the cartoon never did him justice, in my mind, he always sounded like Worf on Star Trek when he first came in. Just the way he was written, he always sounded like Michael Dorn. And I was also a big fan. I like Storm because, Storm, it's great. And I also was a big fan of Sync from Generation X. I liked him as well. But even before that, I'd say my favorite, even though he wasn't technically a superhero, Benjamin Sisko from Deep Space Nine.
Because he was bald, right?
Well, before he was bald. He was still a badass before then, yeah.
Not until later, I know. It took a couple seasons.
And then he got a goatee, so yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think they wouldn't let him go bald with the goatee in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly, because they didn't want him to seem,
threatening.
Imagination to it, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Anyway. My favorite.
What about you, Eric?
My favorite's kind of a compound: Captain America and the Falcon. Cap, because of the retcon that added a black background to the Super Soldier program, and sort of, in my opinion, like really cemented it in what seemed like more real American past. And then that character who survived that process, is shown much later, and his grandson becomes a super patriot.
Isaiah Bradley.
Bradley, there we go, Isaiah Bradley. So I just really like that aspect, and the fact that, and the modern take on Captain America as someone who more often struggles with the idea of being a representative of America, even when America's just shown his whole ass. So that I love it when that comes up in the comics, and then later on, Sam Wilson becomes Captain America. So, but at the time when I started reading comics, it was the Black Panther, Falcon, and Luke Cage. They were the only ones. And Luke Cage was so heavy on blaxploitation, it would be a little cringeworthy. But the Falcon was always presented, at least by Cap, as being a partner on equal footing. And, he didn't have a super soldier serum or anything like that. He had, wings and a bird. And, he did what he did in that way, and I just always appreciated that. I always like that idea of someone who goes above and beyond as an individual.
An honorable mention. I almost forgot to mention him. You forgot one person actually, Eric, is Rhodey. James Rhodes. James Rhodes. Because for a while, when Tony, I think either when he was temporarily dead or Demon in the Bottle, he was basically Iron Man.
Right.
So even though they still call him War Machine, he was Iron Man for a decent length of issues. Yeah.
Right. He jumps into the suit for a minute. He jumps into that Iron Man suit. When was that though? Because I was reading comics in the early
80s. That was like the 80s, I think.
Yeah.
It was like the early or mid 80s, I think.
Yeah. So I was reading them in the mid 70s, and those three are the only ones I can remember ever being around.
Probably one of my favorite. Moments from him wasn't even in an Iron Man comic book. It was an X-Force. So X-Force was like breaking into something. It was when Cable temporarily died during the Executioner song, and temporarily died because that's how you do the comics. And basically, what happened was that it was Cannonball leading the team. He's like, "Oh, we need to get in and out before every Tom, Dick, and Harry with a shield badge comes in and shows us their badge and their attitude, their guns and their attitude." And then the issue ends with like War Machine like pointing his guns at X-Force and saying, "My name's Tom, Dick, and Harry. Here's my gun." Here's my attitude. And that was awesome. I was like, that is great. Love that.
Which one is that one for our viewers who might want to check it out?
So that was the first volume of X-Force. That was probably issue 20. So it was probably a couple issues after the Executioner song, because the Executioner song, the last issue of that was a huge X-Men crossover. It was when crossovers actually meant something. It was X-Men, it was X-Force 18. So in X-Force 18 was the conclusion of the Executioner song, where Strife, who was the clone of Cable, and Cable went into some weird time vortex, and everyone thought they were dead. And so X-Force was kind of rudderless, and they were kind of more of an outlaw group. They were part of the X family, but they were kind of doing their own thing. And so Cannonball at that time was the leader. But yeah, and that was probably issue 20, 21. And I think at the time they were teaming with Lila Shenny, who's kind of like an intergalactic teleporter, who she can't just teleport 5 feet in front of you. She has to teleport like light years away. So that's the only way she can actually do that type of stuff. I just went in a rabbit hole. So.
No, it's totally. I am so enthralled with anybody that has that kind of like immediate recall of comics, because I don't. I'm like, it was that one with that cover of the woman in the red. Like, that's how I recall things. So that was just like, that was awesome.
Wait a minute. It's when you mentioned Cannonball, it reminded me. Like, I'd completely forgotten that he was the leader of that team for a little while, and it's kind of funny how sometimes I lean into that hayseed redneck side of his character, and sometimes it just, the writer just forgets about it and leaves it behind. But that reaction to the police, the authorities coming in, it's so funny, because I saw a tweet recently that was taking issue with all the rednecks who are like siding with the cops, and like, any real redneck has been in a fight with or run from the cops, and they hate them. Any real redneck. So maybe Sam's the real deal.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
So, Kevin, do you have anything else you'd like to add, superhero-wise, geeking out-wise? You just go for it.
No, I'm just kind of sitting back and learning some stuff.
I am too. Okay. So our next question, this is an addition, and I apologize for the last minute addition to the questions you got ahead of time, but I think it's a really cool one. What about your upbringing, your culture, family influences, or what about your upbringing, your culture, or your family has influenced your work as an author, if anything? Kevin, let's start with you.
Nothing.
Okay.
No, seriously. I mean, honestly, really nothing has. I'm kind of the oddball in my family a little bit. Like my mom always supported whatever I wanted to do. So writing, and she was very much behind it, but I always trended towards, science fiction, fantasy, comic books, genre material. And she was more of a procedural type. So, she watched all of the Columbos, the Matlocks, the Quincy's, you name it. That was her bag. So anytime she would refer to the stuff I would do, she's like, yeah, you like that weird stuff, baby, into that weird stuff. So, but she supported me, and really that's kind of all I needed, and I could seek out different stuff on my own to kind of get into. So, I had a supportive background, but I can't really say, I didn't like grow up with my folks watching stuff on Saturday morning or that type of thing or whatever. Now my girlfriend's mom, on the other hand, she's very much into like sci-fi movies, and she's got like an extensive collection of older stuff. So like a lot of the B movies from the 50s and that type of thing. So sometimes it's just kind of fun to sit and talk movies with her because, we vibe on their wavelength.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I remember watching Them. The big one with the giant ants. It's one of my favorites when I was a kid.
The giant ants that had a woman's scream mixed into the sound effects.
Yeah. And it's like that little kid, like, them. That's the one thing I remember, like, to this day of that movie. I love it.
Yeah.
Eric, what about you? What are some of the things maybe from your upbringing or your family or anything from growing up that might have influenced you as an author today?
Well, I think very similar to Kevin, actually. My mom was very supportive of this stuff, but so I was born in 68, so it was around 71 or 2 that, I was old enough to really start reading and stuff. And my mom would actually read comics to me along with the, other stuff. And so it was like Thor, Fantastic Four, the Hulk. And these were, she really loved the Hulk and the Thing, these characters that had become other and were treated, separately. And we grew up in I grew up in a primarily black neighborhood. And at the time, everybody was either, like a nurse or a teacher or worked for the government in some capacity. Like my dad was an accountant for the state. And so there were no, nobody wrote funny books, as everybody called them at the time. Nobody made a living at art, even though my mom was an artist. She was a poet, an artist, a percussionist, but nobody's making a living doing that stuff, and no one could sort of point me in that direction. But still, I love this junk. and as much as my mom enjoyed it, she didn't produce it, but she enjoyed the stuff too. So all the Creature double feature stuff, various movies and comics, and my dad participated because he would bite the bullet and take me to see these movies and things that I wanted to see. I remember going to see Godzilla in movie theaters and stuff, and I know he has absolutely no interest in these but that's so. I grew up consuming all of this stuff, but I never saw myself in any of it. And when you did, that character was there for a hot minute, and you're almost always guaranteed to die, or it was a hard stereotype. And I think I was a tween, I think, when it really hit me, and I started to create characters that looked like me, at least, but still did and existed doing all these other things. They didn't just pop out of the hood. They were from all walks of life. And that's sort of the way the seeds for a bunch of the stuff that happens in Lightning Where's the Red Cape came from.
That's awesome. So I just want a real quick follow-up question, and then Cece, we'll get to your answer on the main question, but is there a character that made it from those stories that you wrote as a child into any of your works, or is it just kind of the seeds of different ideas that kind of translated?
Actually. One's this he's essentially a Superman character, but he doesn't actually know where he's from because he was adopted, and he's sort of a blend of any ethnicity you can imagine, but he can fly, he has super strength, and he joins the police force like his adopted father was a cop. And another character that's a friend of his, what I had created around that same time, like this. So these really simple, childish sketches.
Nothing wrong with that.
But they stuck with me for a long time, and other things got added along the way, and they grew up.
That's awesome. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Cece, what about you? Are there any influences from growing up, family, childhood, anything like that influenced your writing today?
So I kind of am I was in a similar boat as Kevin, where I was the oddball in the family when it came to my interest in science fiction and fantasy and comic books. Basically, I just kind of had it just gravitated towards it more so when I was younger, when it came to, and I wasn't really a comic book fan until the early 90s. That's when I started. I was aware to a degree, but it was more like science fiction, like Star Wars and Star Trek. Like I didn't get in. I knew a few of the episodes, like of the old series, like the Tribble episode and the Mirror, which is one of the reasons I love alternate universes. But it was TNG that's what got me into kind of Star Trek at that point. But yeah, it's like my mom was never really. She was a creative too, and there was like creative energy in our household. So she was never really dissuaded my interest unless it interfered with my schoolwork. Then, then it was a problem. But for me,
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So I also I watched a lot of Saturday morning cartoons. That was a thing, Voltron and that type of stuff. Transformers, G.I. Joe, He-Man, She-Ra, that type of stuff. But it was like comics where I started really kind of going down a path. And also I used to sketch a lot too. I used to sketch a lot of just my own stuff. But it was when I started reading comic books, and particularly for me, it was X-Men. That was the big thing for me, was the X-Men series and their varied spin-offs at that point. There was like 7 or 8 spin-offs at that point, but it didn't seem excessive at that point. It was just like, oh, this is great. And it worked for, now it's excessive. There's way too much now, but at the time, it was kind of like, okay, you had Uncanny X-Men, which is the original series. You had X-Men, you had X-Factor, then you had X-Force, you had Excalibur, which I never really cared about. Then you had Cable, you had Wolverine, and then you had Generation X.
Wow.
And then you also had you had a crossover. Then it's like you could keep it contained within that universe, unless it was like, I think the one they did after Fatal Attractions, when Wolverine lost his adamantium and Magneto got brainwiped. Then they did a crossover with the Avengers, where it was on Genosha, and they're trying to fight for Magneto's legacy. But
oh my gosh,
going back to that, then there's Image Comics too. I like some of the stuff. I mean, granted, the stories were crap, but I mean, the artwork was cool. I mean, because it's like there was Wildcats that Jim Lee was drawing. You had Cyberforce. I mean, yeah, they were kind of X-Men clones, but they're still, again, great to look at. And then Youngblood. And so for me, it was around this time that I like to sketch my own stuff, but I started kind of coming up with some of my own ideas at this point. Particularly my space opera series, Star Brigade, a lot of the ideas started coming from that. So I remember initially it was essentially like X-Men in space. That's where the initial idea came from. And
that's awesome.
I remember when I was sketching the main character, and initially I didn't see too much of a problem with it. And it wasn't even problematic, but as I was sketching more and as I started seeing like, people like Benjamin Sisko, Bishop, and I started thinking to myself, looking at this character, I'm like, and here's the thing, without ruining the light mood, because this is a great forum. I think for myself, and I don't know, I can't speak for anyone else on the panel, but given what we were exposed to growing up, there weren't a lot of Black voices and Black characters on TV. So a lot of times, in the default thing in Western culture is that you kind of, if you're coming up with a character, sometimes you see them as white. And you kind of imagine them as white, or you hear them with a white voice, because that's what you're seeing on TV. That's the mediums you're seeing. There's not a lot. It's very rare when you saw, like, I didn't realize at the time what a big deal Benjamin Sisko was for science fiction. Having a Black man as the lead of any show, let alone a science fiction show, was a huge deal. And so I kind of stopped myself one time when I was kind of, just tweaking the character a bit. And I was just like, I've seen this character 10 million times. He looked like he could have been Cyclops. He could have been Havoc. He could have been Heatwave from Cyberforce. He could have been Spartan from Wildcats. And I was just like, I've seen this guy like 10 million times. I think we need to switch it up a bit.
Yeah.
So that's when I started to kind of really craft him, and I made him African American. And it was just a shift for me. And then even with my superhero series, when I did that, that was initially the character who was, there's another character of color who's Asian or Pacific Islander, if you will. But there was another character who was like biracial. And for some reason I had this weird iffiness, hesitance to make her fully Black. And then finally, I think I was having a conversation with one of my cousins. I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm going to make her Black Girl Magic. We're making this happen. I don't know why I was having such a weird hesitance to do it, but I'm glad I went against that hesitancy. But going back, so I kept coming up with these characters, and I had an idea for my first book series, like probably when I was in high school. And then it was kind of nice in college where I found like-minded people who kind of were more let their geek flag fly, and that was cool. And it was in college where I finally kind of had this epiphany. It was my end of my sophomore year. I was looking at some of my sketches, and I was just like, I had this eureka moment where I was just like, I have to write. I got to do this. Because I initially wanted to be a comic artist, but I wasn't good enough. I didn't like drawing noses, and I hated drawing backgrounds. So
that would have been such an avant-garde style. Like, exactly. I'm intrigued.
And then also animation, I was like, okay, that's really difficult. And I saw things moving towards more like CGI and whatnot. I'm like, do I really want to do this? And so it was in college where I was just like, that's where I was like, okay, I got to write. And my initial attempt was not really great, but it wasn't until I think it was my senior year, before my senior year of college, where I was just like, I made the concerted effort where I was going to do this. And I know that this writer, now she has basically become Lady Voldemort, but which is kind of it's kind of ironic. She's become She Will Not Be Named. But it was her books that were a huge inspiration to me in terms of me like getting into writing, because I was so drawn into that world in a way that I've never been with any other book I've read, I should say. And just like, I was so sucked in, and I just, I'm a slow reader, but these books, I was devouring them in like a few days. And that's what really, I was just like, okay, if I had a tenth of that woman's talent, I'd be happy. I'd love to emulate how she's writing, how she draws people in, how she makes these characters that are so engaging, they're so real. And so that's how I just got into writing. But when it came to actually the superhero fiction series, it was, since I'd been a comic book fan for a while, I had this idea for a Superman movie or movie trilogy, because it was like, hey, the Superman movies kind of suck. Why don't we actually?
We talked about.
I mean, here's the thing: Man of Steel, I actually didn't hate it. I thought it was flawed, but I thought it was good. But the ones before that, like A Quest for Peace, and then also knowing the story. Like, I'll send it to you guys. I'll send it to you, Trish. You can disseminate it. But the story of trying to get even just to Superman Returns was just a hot mess. And just all the bad ideas they had. It's so ridiculous. It has to be true because it's Hollywood. But the thing is that I was just like, I can come up with a better idea than this. And so what I did was, I was thinking, what if you had a story where it's like you saw in the first movie, you see the origin of both Superman and Lex Luthor at the same time. Where it's like, and this is not the stupid land, I want land, I'm going to make land and be like a real estate agent.
Thank God, because that wasn't.
It was terrible.
It was awful, yeah.
I mean, it worked for the 70s, but it's just like when they tried to bring it back, I was like, really? And then you had
a lot of fun to watch.
And then and then you had Lex Zuckerberg in the whatever that grimdark crap was that Zack Snyder had. But it's just like, what if you had the genius, the tech genetics genius who built LexCorp, who basically killed his parents via an explosion, and then made it look like an accident, and then used that to fund his first technology or genetics, whatever, patents. That's his origin, and you see that. You see him building this. And then at the same time, we're finally seeing the Superman that we deserve, where it's like, okay, his whole life is not a nightmare like they showed in Man of Steel when he was growing up. There are actually some good parts. But you show the part where, let's say he's a kid, he's a 5-year-old, and these people tried to rob the farm. He nearly kills the guy at 5 years old because he's trying to defend his parents and he just can't control his powers. He's playing hide and seek. He's maybe 8, 9 years old. He actually runs. He finds himself in Missouri. How did I get here? And then when the tornadoes happen, instead of staying there doing nothing, like in Man of Steel, he's actually trying to save people. And for the first time, he actually flies. So these are the ideas that are coming to myself. And then he's like, okay, I should have done more. And so after college, he actually gets a degree. He then goes to, he goes around the world. He does kind of like what Anderson Cooper did, where he goes around the world and he's basically just trying to help people, but get his powers under control, learn how to do, it's basically almost kind of like, I used the Birthright miniseries where they kind of reimagined the origin. That was kind of a template. And at the same time, Lex, as he's building his company, he's tracking like who exactly is this person who's doing all these like last minute saves, these things that should have destroyed people. And so eventually they come together. I think I'm taking too much time, but either way.
You're passionate. I love it. You're passionate.
Your pitch meeting.
It's much better than what we got out of one.
Exactly.
But either way, since I saw that wasn't going to happen, I got that idea. I took that and also an inspiration from Astro City and Heroes. First season Heroes, not the rest of whatever happened. But and I put that together and made that one thing, and also a little bit of Carnival. And I just, and that was the baseline for what I wanted to do for the Pantheon Saga. And so when I finally started to do that around 2016, 2017, so that's where the inspiration for that came from.
Awesome.
Hope that answers your question.
It does. And I'm just like, what's happening next? This is exciting. I'm like, all into it. You can have story time.
Seriously. And I did have some more ideas about it because it was just like fascinating. It's like, what if we actually saw them and we gave their origins justice, where it's like, you saw him, you even saw a little bit with Lana, where Lana knew the secret, and you even saw with Lex, where when Lex is kind of really opening up his new Metropolis Center, it's kind of like, what if he's getting bothered by a pesky cub reporter by the name of Lois Lane?
Yeah.
And then
tie it all in. That's awesome.
And then the whole thing with like Superman and his like, he's questing around the world, you actually see kind of like what he's trying to do, and maybe the first metahumans he faces. That's what Lex is using to kind of be like, okay, let me use this as my super soldiers, and then Superman has to fight them. And then I was even thinking of a good way to throw in Batman without whatever, the less said about B versus S, the better.
Yeah.
But finding a way to put it in.
Hollywood would hammer that in, however.
Yeah. And then you can even throw in something with the Eradicator, where it's like maybe in the second movie, the third movie, where the Eradicator starts influencing Superman to almost turn Earth into a new Krypton, but it's because of his human friends that he's able to snap out of it, and then he has to fight the Eradicator. Which, for those who don't know what the Eradicator is basically, he was a Kryptonian technology. It was included with the Fortress, but it became one of the new Supermen. When there was the death of Superman and the reign of Superman, he was kind of the one with the visors who could shoot stuff from his hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is some deep cuts, man. I love it.
I tell you, I'm a black nerd, and it's just, I didn't even know what that meant until after college, because I didn't even think, like, literally, it's like, for me, people just saw me before I kind of, started working out. They're just like, oh, Steve Urkel. So it's like, I eschewed that until I found out, oh yeah, Donald Glover, he's cool. All right.
See, the good thing about these characters, though, however, as much shade as gets thrown at Marvel and DC for being, they have their moments where they're actually kind of evil, terrible companies.
Yeah.
Do bad things. But this stuff has been going on for so long that it's possible for anyone to write for these things, to create for them. Like, these characters aren't owned by any one creator. Like, no one's going to just jump into my universe and do whatever they want. But Marvel and DC and all these others, you actually have an opportunity to make that a reality.
Yeah.
Or it's a possibility if you can, talk to people and worm your way into something. Because I don't think it's a terrible idea.
And the thing is, it's funny that you say that, because I remember that's one of the reasons, aside from the drawing deficiencies that I had, one of the reasons why I was kind of also iffy about being a comic artist was because, you don't get to own your characters. And I was just like, hell no. If I create it, I want to own it, man. Yeah. So
even when I was drawing them and stuff, and I went to art school, and I'm not a terrible artist, and I wanted to be a comic artist, but the whole idea of, as much as I enjoyed these characters, I didn't want to draw them. I didn't want to make stories with them.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to do my own stuff.
Nice.
Kevin, do you have anything you want to add before we go on to the next question?
No.
Okay. I just wanted to check in with you.
Appreciate
it. So I do want to make clear we have a couple of questions that might be a little heavy. And if at any point you're like, you know what, I really don't want to talk about that today, just say that. We move right on. Not a problem whatsoever. So this is one of the questions that you got from the original moderator. And it says, with the recent uprisings across the country, what responsibility, if any, do you feel falls on Black creatives in their works?
That's the first thing I thought of with that is in responsibility. Their responsibility, I think, is to represent their own background and their experiences in their work, but not all of their work, because there's so many, there is a broadness to what's considered the African diaspora. There's so many different kinds of peoples and cultures and breakdowns and ethnicities, and I love seeing more of that in those stories, and it's only going to come from those people when they write it. However, I also want to see those people producing work that isn't necessarily based on their experiences, that is just as popular, and so representing on both sides of things. It doesn't have to be very personal. It can be a great idea and very entertaining, or it can be something that represents, or it can be both. And that's what I think that the responsibility is, basically to bring that voice, because no one else can, as well as participating at a professional level.
I completely agree with Eric. Black creatives are not a monolith in any medium, and yeah, it's great to see the personal experience, but yeah, let's just do something because we're fans. Because ultimately, at our cores, we are fans. This is why we're doing this. I think the late, great J.R.R. Tolkien, one of the reasons why he did Lord of the Rings is because he wanted to read a type of fantasy book that he would want to read. And I think ultimately, whether it be a Black creative or another person of color or a white creative, it's just like, tell a story that you would like to read. Tell a story that you enjoy. And I think it's good to kind of still tell these stories and to be visible, but I think putting the entire weight and onus on us is like, we don't represent everyone. It's great to have people touched by our work, to have people who connect with it, which is fantastic. But at the end of the day, we're doing this because we're fans, and we want to make sure that these stories are told, because aside from just being fans, also we're doing this because we're seeing a deficiency out there. in stories being told by people, you know, with characters of color. But I think for me, it's that when we're doing these stories, more than anything, while it's great to have a person of color as the lead, you don't just want to have them to be a person of color just because, you know, you want those woke points or you want those tokenisms. You have to make them a character that has substance, that has meaning, that has an arc, that has flaws, that does not get handled. You're on that journey with them. The hero's journey, it's an oldie but a goodie. And the reason why it still works is because it draws you into the character and their struggles and their journey, whatever it is. You see their flaws, you see their failings, and then you see their victories. And when they have a victory, it's earned.
Yeah.
And that's regardless of race, but it's especially important for characters of color too, because sometimes when you have a person of color and you put them on, sometimes the content creators and the more mainstream will high-five themselves, which is essentially clapping, but they'll high-five themselves, pat themselves on the back, look what we did, and then the characters crash, and it's just like, okay, what was the point of that? And we want to make sure that this is a good character, first and foremost. This is a good character, good story, and if they're a person of color, even better. I think a good example is, even though this is not speculative fiction, but Scandal. Olivia Pope.
Okay.
People cared about her. She happened to be black, which is great, but people cared about her regardless. And you can get some of that stuff in. You can get the cultural stuff in. That's important. You can get that stuff in, but you make sure that she is a character first and foremost. She feels flesh and blood. She feels real, and you can identify with her. She draws you in.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
How to Get Away with Murder in that same vein.
Yes.
I was thinking that just now.
Either.
Anime is a great character. Annalise Keaton.
Yeah.
That show was like, I mean, I binged that and I was just like, oh my gosh, it was an amazing show. Kevin, what about you? Do you want to, you don't have to answer the question if you don't want to, but if you'd like to, go ahead and have a stab.
No, I got no problem answering that. I pretty much agree in a lot of ways with CC and Eric. For me personally, I guess that's the best way for me to answer personally. Yeah, I feel a huge responsibility to reflect, you know, the stuff that's going on. But like it's been said, we have to have some balance. With all the stuff going on, I have had differing ideas, like I want to say something, or how do I address this? And, you know, can I address it with my current characters, you know, in a way that doesn't pull me off track from what my original plan is? Because the future I see for my characters, you know, we're going to touch on social issues. Like I said, you know, you bring it up, we touch on it, but I don't want to make it an opus about just race in America, you know. But you know, at the same time, I also have a web comic, and really I've been dealing with a lot of this through that. The web comic's called The Life and Times of Abigail Waller, and I guess because it's more of a everyday slice of life type story. As things happen in our world, you know, it happens in their world. So right now they're going through all the stuff with coronavirus and you know, all the stuff that's going on with that. But in the midst of that, then we had a rash of, we had George Floyd. We've had people being found hanged and all types of unrest and stuff going on. And I couldn't, when I do my web comic, it's structured kind of like a TV show. In other words, I have seasons planned out. And I already had the story. I had the arc for this season. This season should have been done, I don't know, a couple months ago. But once coronavirus hit, and once these other things hit, I couldn't not address it. You know, I couldn't. I didn't want my characters to go on, you know, out at the movies, at the bar, having a drink, all that type of stuff. When in the real world, it didn't really reflect. So in that instance, and I guess because I put that out, I updated twice a week. It was a lot quicker and a lot easier to really address, you know, what's been going on. So, yeah, I feel a big pressure to do it, and for me personally, I always will, but it does have to be about balance because, you know, I didn't go into this just to be, you know, the heavy issue guy. You want to have some fun with it. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys for answering that question. That's, I am actually learning so much. I I love what you guys are talking about, the geeking out with the comics, and also these a little bit heavier questions. Thank you guys for being so open.
No problem.
Does anybody have anything to add before we move on to the next question? Anything? Okay. Let's see. Is there another question that you guys got from the original moderator? Is there a writer of color in comics or superhero media in general that you look up to, and what has their work done that's inspired you, really? Any particular works or creators that you really look up to?
Yes.
Go for it, Eric.
All right. So I mentioned the Falcon earlier.
Mhm.
What really cemented it for me was a 4-issue miniseries that was a solo thing for the Falcon. And the story, you know, he's not only fighting crime in his neighborhood, which, you know, I didn't see a whole lot of that in comics at the time, and dealing with all the, you know, other crazy comic stuff like what are the giant robots that chase the X-Men? Not the Sentinel.
Sentinels, yeah, Sentinels.
They are Sentinels. Okay. He had to deal with one of those. And there was a plot to kidnap the president. I mean, there's all kinds of nutty stuff that happened there. But it always kind of bent back to Sam's relationship to the part of the city that he was, you know, the generation that he was trying to help. Right? And that was written by, what was his name? James Owsley.
Okay.
And then later on, when they rebooted the Black Panther, and a lot of the stuff from that particular series, the fact that he was a king and, you know, part of the world stage, and the Dora Malay, and all of these aspects of it were done by Christopher Priest when he was writing on the series between him and Reggie Hudlin. Well, it turns out that James Owsley is Christopher Priest.
Oh, wow.
And so I really dug that Falcon story, the Black Panther, they updated the Black Panther, which, you know, made him more diplomatic and sociopolitical and on a broader sort of world stage. And then he also wrote Batman versus Deathstroke and Captain America, and everything he brings to me is complex, and he seems to get to the most fun and interesting aspects of the characters. And it's hardly ever just a linear story. There's always a certain amount of complexity in it. And I haven't read everything he's written, but everything I've written by him, I've really enjoyed. And it seems to elevate the comic medium whenever he does do stuff. He's been regularly writing Deathstroke, and I haven't read much of that, but again, it's got twists and turns, there's mysteries, there's action, there's intrigue, and he doesn't spell everything out for you, and I just really enjoy that.
That's awesome. Kevin, do you have a creator that you just really love that's inspired you, or one that you're just like, I don't care what they're writing, I'm going to read them?
You know, I don't, and it's because, you know, and this might get my nerd card revoked or whatever, but
I won't tell, I promise.
I'm the guy that's into superheroes and stuff, but I've never seriously collected comics. Most of my knowledge has always come from either watching TV shows, cartoons, you know, and then now we've got Wikipedia, so I can go on there and get lost and like learn the back history or whatever. As CC was talking earlier, and we mentioned how the history was so convoluted. That was one of the main reasons why I never got into comics, because I'm a completionist. And I'm like, where do I start? Like, what is the real story? And you can never get in and get I don't know what's going on. Right. So I'm like, I've never really got into collecting comics. So, but when a TV show come on, I'll watch those episodes. I'll learn, you know, what I can, and I go from that. So when you say a creator that, you know, they put out a book that I want to read, I don't really have one. Now, I mean, I've got creators that have dabbled into other mediums that were huge inspirations for me. For my character, for the series I'm writing now, the inspiration was Robert Townsend's Meteor Man. Which, you know, okay. See, we all know what I'm talking about.
A little bit.
I loved that movie, and when I walked out of the theater, and it touches back into, you know, the reason why is, besides the fact that the cast was amazing, the movie isn't really a good movie. I mean, I look on it fondly, but I'll just be honest, it's not a good movie, but I do love it. But it was the first time that I remembered seeing like a black superhero on screen at a movie theater, you know. And when I walked out, I remember I'm standing in the parking lot waiting for my mom to pick me up, and I'm like, I want more of this, and how do I get more of this? And it was around about the time that I was discovering that I liked writing and then wanted to do it. So I said, well, if I want more, we have to create it. So right there in the parking lot, I started creating the basis for what became Keisha Jenkins, who's the lead in my series. So that was like the inspiration that's gotten me here. But in other creators, and he's no longer with us, but Dwayne McDuffie, you know, I loved a lot of his work, comics as well as animation, the Justice League. And, you know, it's weird going on YouTube, and a lot of times I'll see clips from different movies or different parts of the series, and I'll just sit there and watch it because I love the stuff. And then you find out these particular scenes that you love so much happen to be the ones that Dwayne wrote. And it's like, you know, one of my favorite bits it's from Justice League. I think it's probably Justice League Unlimited.
That's a good show.
And it's the part where Darkseid and Superman are fighting off, and they're fighting, and they're in the city. And I think Darkseid has laid waste to most, but it's the speech where he gives, where he basically says, you know, all my life I've had to hold back. You know, I feel like I'm living in a world of cardboard. You know, one wrong move and I could seriously hurt somebody. Yeah. But you can take it, can't you, big boy? And he's like, you know, what we have here is a chance for me to cut loose and show you how powerful I really am. And I just really love that speech because I'd never thought of Superman kind of in that way, but that's what it must feel like. So
yeah,
exactly. The world is cardboard to him.
Mm-hmm. So those are two, you know, creators that were hugely inspirational for me.
I'm sorry, Cece, go ahead.
I'd say for me, it's like I'm kind of with Kevin, where I don't really have a creator of color that really inspired me when I was growing up. I do know that I wanted to read Octavia Butler. I can. I've heard so much good stuff about her work that I definitely would love to. I am going to read it. I
have a suggestion for you later if you want one.
I do. I
love her. She's amazing.
Absolutely. And kind of to what Kevin was saying, it was like as I started getting older, it's then you start seeing people on TV who are people of color, and they're not just a cartoon character. They're not just a stereotype. They're actually a character. It's just like, oh, wow, that's actually nice to see. I remember for me, one of those times was Spawn. And because I remember when I was reading the comic book, I didn't realize he was black until like I think later on when I was like,
they don't reveal it.
It still blows my mind that a white guy created him. I'm like, wow, really? I'm like, cool, you know.
And so just going that, and Michael Jai White, he was perfect. It sucks that it didn't get a sequel, but it was one of those movies that it was just like, that was really cool. It was good to see that. You know, we need to see more of that. Not just because, but to see it because it makes sense with the story.
Yeah. I got to say, Kevin, I am always so happy to meet another geek whose entree into superheroes wasn't comic books. It was like TV and movies, because that was me. Like, that was my entree into science fiction and superheroes in general, like classic Star Trek and Christopher Reeve as Superman and Linda Carter as Wonder Woman. Like that was it for me. And then X-Men on, you know, the cartoon on Saturday mornings. I was like, I kind of knew that they were comic books, but I never read a comic book till I was an adult. And that is just the weirdest thing to say.
So here's an interesting thing. The initial X-Men team that you saw in the cartoons, that was actually based on the X-Men Blue team when the second series started. The thing that they changed is that they switched out Psylocke and added in Storm and Jean, because Storm and Jean were actually on the gold team. So, and here's the thing. So Kevin, I'll tell you this. A good entry point is, I'm going to take you back a couple of years, maybe about so I'd say you go back to about maybe the early 90s. I'd say X-Men #1 of Volume 2, and then Uncanny X-Men 281. Those would be a great entry points for anyone who's looking to get in, because particularly if you go up till about X-Men 25, You have a lot of good stuff that happens during that time. You have the Executioner song. You also have Fatal Attractions, which was a great Magneto crossover. But it's great because it kind of splits the team, because there's an interesting bit of a clusterfuck that happened for a long time in the Uncanny X-Men series. And then what happened is that everyone kind of got back together, because they were split apart for a long time. And then they got back together towards about the late 200s, probably about 270 something. They came back from space. And then there's the Muir Island saga, where they had to fight the Shadow King. So after everyone got back together and they realized, wow, we actually have like too many people on one team, that's when they split up the teams into, you had the blue team led by Cyclops, and that was Cyclops, Wolverine, Beast, Gambit, Rogue, Jubilee, and Psylocke. And then you had the gold team led by Storm, and that was Storm, Jean Grey, Archangel, Iceman, and Colossus. And then eventually Bishop was brought in, and he basically was coming back to save the X-Men because there was a traitor on the team, and for the longest time he thought it was Gambit. So it was a great start. It's a great reboot spot without completely changing everything and without restarting Uncanny X-Men. So that's a good spot to start off.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and then at the same time, there was also X-Force #1, and that was actually based off New Mutants. New Mutants was kind of like almost like the second coming of the X-Men, like when they were students, when they were teenagers and students. And so that ran about 100 issues. And it was when Professor X for a while was actually their teacher, and then Magneto. And then towards the end, that's when Cable gets introduced. And when Cable gets introduced, then we add a couple new characters, and it becomes X-Force, which is a little more paramilitary. And Cable basically is Scott and a clone of Jean Grey's son.
Yeah.
To the future because he got infected by a technovirus by Apocalypse. And he came back. Yeah. It's a bit convoluted, but
and time travel at the same time.
Well, you gave me a place to start so I can figure out the rest.
I'd say before, like, this is probably, because I know right now it's just so ridiculous. It's so convoluted and just all over the place, and who's doing what, who died, who came back. It's like, what? So I'd say that's probably in my opinion, it's one of the best new starting points that you could get in, which really gives you a lot of good history, and it gives you a nice entree of some of the old school X-Men villains as well, because in the beginning of the new X-Men series, the blue team goes against Magneto again. He's like their first villain, the classic. In the reboot, well, I wouldn't say reboot, in the restart of the gold team, that's where you see a taste of the Hellfire Club, which was one of their really, really original villains. And that's what got them. The Hellfire Club is one of the reasons why Jean became Dark Phoenix. But that's a whole nother story, so we won't get into that. But,
you connected the dots, because the funny thing is, like, you're mentioning all these names. I'm like, okay, yeah, I remember this character from here, this from there, from this TV show or that cartoon. I'm like, all right, this is all coming together.
And also in the X-Men series in '91, and just to let you know, that was like probably one of the best-selling #1s of all time, was that new X-Men series. And it's also where we saw Omega Red for the first time. He's one of my favorite X-Men villains. Yeah.
I haven't seen enough of him, but I do like him.
Yeah, he has a great history with Wolverine, but the thing is also, he was also Russia at the time, or the Soviet Union, as they still labeled them as the Red Scare. He was their attempt at creating their own Captain America, but he was flawed. Despite how powerful he was, because he was like, Weapon Omega, but he was their Captain America, but he ended up being put on ice for a long time because of Team X, which was Wolverine, Maverick, and Sabretooth years back. Okay.
We have one viewer question I want to get to before we run too long on time. And Remy, keep them coming as you see them. So Rob Green asks, what do superheroes still have to teach us in the 21st century? Who wants to take this one first?
Apparently all the things that a lot of people's moms never taught them growing up.
Good question. That's a good answer.
Well,
period.
I could stop there, really. I really could stop there, but just the basics, love, decency, loyalty, fairness. I mean, I think the issues that they can teach are evergreen. I don't think anything really has changed. I mean, if the last few weeks have shown us anything, we haven't changed as much as we'd like to think we have. So, the basics still matter for me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything they want to add?
Go on, Kevin. Eric, sorry. Go on, Eric.
I don't think it's so much. I think the same way that the X-Men were analogous to civil rights when Kirby and Lee started them, right? That they were the other group, and it's been a repeated theme where there's, they have Genosha, where there was mutant apartheid, and they have. They're constantly trying to create a technology to stop or capture mutants, detect them, do this, that, and this, all kinds of a civil rights nightmare ongoing in the X-Men comics. And I think because every story has not been written yet, someone is going to pinpoint an aspect in history, a point in history, or an aspect of conflict that'll be ported into the superhero genre. And I think the important thing there is that when this stuff is well written, something that's well written is well written. But if you're more interested in superpowers and things blowing up, you'll get that story in the genre that you're most interested in. And that's where I think there's the opportunity for learning new things. Like what it might be, no idea.
Awesome.
I'd say that start with empathy. Start with empathy. Start with curiosity, because there's so much. Just even during this time, as difficult as it is, for those people who are just learning, don't make it about you. Make it about, okay, if I'm going to be an ally, if I want this world to change, how can I not just hear, how can I listen? And how can I take action? And how can I feed my knowledge with, because there are deficits in all of our knowledge, what happened with, like, for instance, what happened with Tulsa in 1921. I didn't know about that until the Watchmen series came out. I didn't know that actually happened. And there's so many other points in history that have been swept under the rug that have led to what's been happening right now. And I think that we need to be curious. We need to be curious, and we need to be empathetic, and we need to also, even us people of color, we need to look at ourselves and be like, what are our blind spots? Obviously there's the trauma, there's a generational trauma, and then there's also so much that we have to bear. But it's just like everyone's got to look at their blind spots. Where have I been? Where have I lacked? And see how we can come together and be better allies for everyone, and not just point the finger and paint every just one type of person or group of people or one employment as you're all bad, painting with a bad brush. That helps nothing. Obviously there are systemic issues, but again, how can we be better? How can we come from points of empathy, and how can we listen? I've learned a lot of that in the last 3 years, as opposed to just how everything goes. And I think it's just, we need to continue that. It's unfortunate that, looking back 30 years ago, less than 30 years ago, the Rodney King situation happened, Rodney King beatings. And there has still not been enough progress. Like, you can just go Google on TV, and then you can see, or Google on TV, what am I talking about? Google for videos, and just look on YouTube. And I think within 10, 15 minutes, I could find 3 different incidents that happened within the last 3 years where it's like, have we barely progressed? The only difference is that now we can catch it on camera.
Yeah.
And that's not even the only thing. It's like, a lot of times that's the spearhead. There's still a long pole behind that spearhead in terms of the systemic injustices. Like, I'll give you an example. Janet Jackson, Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, I love her. Grew up listening to her, and look what happened when the wardrobe malfunction happened. Her career got destroyed.
Yeah.
Do you think that would have happened if she wasn't a person of color? If they didn't think that she was an easy target? You're seeing, and that's just another bit of the systemic injustices. And it's just, we have to be mindful of that and look at how can we do better in that scenario going forward? How can we do better by these people? This woman who was a trailblazer and her career got nuked, and it was like 10 years before she could even do anything again. Mm-hmm. And there are people in power, like the guy who used to run CBS, Les Moonves, who is like hell-bent on destroying her career after that.
Yeah. That was very purposeful. Yeah,
it was very purposeful.
Yeah, and so Justin Timberlake's career, he was fine.
Exactly. Oh, he was fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, he's profited and built his career off the backs of black people for years, and he has been able to get away with it. Yet Janet made a mistake, and her career nearly got ended. And these are just some of the injustices that so many people of color have faced when it comes to just, if they step out of pocket just a little bit, look what happened even with LeBron. LeBron expressed an opinion. He was told to shut up and dribble.
Yeah. The response is disproportionate.
Yeah, so it's like, you see people.
Is probably the most recent.
Yeah, you see people profit off. You see people enjoy what the contributions of the black community. You see that people profit, be inspired. You see cultural appropriation and the lack of credit. And then when you see those artists, some artists who actually are able to succeed, if they do one thing wrong or if they're accused of one thing, then it's over. And that needs to change. Something needs to be better. And,
thank you guys for being very open and honest. We could end right here and it would be just like the most amazing panel with that. Do you guys want to take one more fun question? Or do you, no, but I'm trying to gauge, sorry. Oh God, that probably came out really wrong. One that I meant like a geeking out question. Yes, I should have said. Yeah. Or let's end it on a good note. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know if you guys wanted to end it there, or you might want to do like a geeking out kind of a question. Okay. So, what comic book property are you just dying to see brought to the silver screen? And it could be a hero of color or not, it doesn't matter. Just something that you're just like, man, I really wish that they would bring this character to the screen. And bonus question, if you have a casting choice in mind, please let us know, because that's like my favorite part of fantasizing about this stuff is who would play what character. So go for it. Feel free for all.
I would love to see X-Men done right by Marvel.
Yeah, waiting on that.
For the longest time, don't get me wrong, the first two X-Men movies and maybe Days of Future Past were pretty good, but they've never quite gotten that team aspect down, and they've never really allowed us to get to really know the other characters outside of Professor X, Magneto, and Wolverine. And maybe Mystique, which didn't make sense because I'm like, she has a rich backstory, but she's not a main eventer.
Yeah.
She's not even.
She was very centered in the movies. Yeah,
she was a little too centered in the movies, and I think it's just because it was Jennifer Lawrence. But
agreed.
I'd like to see it done right by Marvel, even though they're going to have to change it.
With an X-Men movie, can I just please get one good scene where I have the X-Men on one side, the Brotherhood on another, some words between Professor and Magneto, and can someone give me a great orchestral version of that X-Men theme as they go into battle? If they just give me that, hey, I'm and I've heard people online that have done cool covers. I'm like, man, if they put that in a movie, that'd be over with. But sorry, I just had to jump in on that because you
on X-Men. I can see that.
Ooh, you touched on X-Men. Kind of like what they did with Civil War, where it's just like, okay, they're about to get it on. They kind of battle lines are drawn.
But that was the part that got me most. I still go back and watch clips from Endgame, just the portal thing, and every time I get goosebumps, and I love it, man.
I swear, I think the Avengers movie X2 and Civil War the first Avengers movie, and then Civil War. That was probably some of the biggest geeking out. I remember just even before the fight started, I was like bouncing my seat like a little kid. And then even when Giant Man, I had a feeling it was coming, but just to see it, I was literally like, I was howling along with everyone else in the theater. I was just like, oh my God, it's Giant Man. So,
right.
Yeah, because it was great. It was kind of like, okay, this was kind of like Avengers 2.5. I'm all here for it, and it was great. I loved it.
I mean, you could tell it was made by people who like know the characters, love the characters, and they were thinking, hey, we're not going to tell them we're going to get Giant Man. We're not going to even drop it on you, but we're just going to, right there in the movie, all of a sudden it's Giant Man. It's like, they got it. You know? I just want to see somebody that gets it.
And I'm so glad I wasn't spoiled by it, too, because I heard it was spoiled by like Funko Pop, like online. I'm like, I'm so glad I didn't see that. You know,
I'm glad too.
Well, anything that I'd wanted to see is actually happening. Like I wanted a good Black Panther movie, and I got it. And the next thing I wanted to see was Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu, and they're working on that. So,
with the real Mandarin,
right? With the
real, right.
That's awesome. That's like Christmas, man. I felt that way when Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel came out. I was like, oh, finally.
Yeah.
That's the best feeling.
If I had maybe a couple properties that I would love to see done some kind of way, I mean, I'd mentioned Static before, but I would love to see him, you know, on the big screen or TV screen in some way, some shape, form, or fashion. But DC, you know, they took a big hit when Marvel dropped Black Panther, the movie on them, and DC, I thought maybe they would make some type of move or something to try to counter, and they really didn't. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, well, there's one way that DC could get a 1-2 counterpunch in if they decided. I mean, since they're doing all types of characters all over the place, so I'm like, why not do something with Dixon? You know, why not do something where you've got maybe the where you get the first movie with a Black female lead, and then you've got something, you know, in a way that's kind of comparable to doing something with a Black Panther, but you can go, you know, the sky's the limit with their power set. And they just really haven't done anything with that. And I'm like, sitting there, it's money.
You know, they could also do Jon Stewart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Hal Jordan's kind of boring. He's just generic flyboy. Okay, he has a little. It's just like he's boring. So Jon Stewart would be way more interesting.
Well, they're doing a Green Lantern, I think, a HBO Max series, and from what I understand, it's supposed to be, you know, encompassing a lot of the core, the Green Lantern core. So sooner or later, we're gonna get them. We're gonna get.
You know what? I was initially kind of. I didn't really like AT&T buying Warner Brothers. Now I've actually changed my mind because they actually know what they're doing. Warner Brothers doesn't. Warner Brothers doesn't.
They don't know.
AT&T does, because they're the ones who decided to do the Snyder Cut. They're the ones who are just like, hey, let's actually get some plan going on here. Warner Brothers didn't have a plan. So
I don't want to turn it into a DC bashing session, but you're right.
There's so much. It's so easy.
They don't know what they're doing, and you know they started with arguably the most iconic heroes in the world before Marvel started really blowing up the spot. I'm sitting over here looking at DC like, are y'all gonna get off the bench? Do you want to get in this game? I mean, come on. It's easy, but I'm not Walter Hamada, so I don't run it.
They do okay with TV and cartoon movies, and speaking of that, like I would love to see the people that did Into the Spider-Verse do something with Static.
Okay.
You know, it seemed like
Ramsey and the crew. I think they would kill it.
Yeah. They'd kill it. They totally do a good job.
Shut up and take my money. You know.
You know what though? I will say this though. I am curious because I mean it's interesting because Marvel with Endgame. I mean it's the end of like 22, 23 movies, and it's such it should be interesting to see how they move forward because. Will they be able to recapture what they had before? It's not going to be the same, obviously, but it's just like there was such finality to Endgame that it's just like how can you move forward, especially with these new properties that don't seem as connected right now.
Yeah, they got to do it with the new properties. Yeah,
well, yeah, because you got Eternals, you got Shang-Chi, you still have the next Black Panther, whenever that's going to come. I'm most interested. In the Doctor Strange, Morbius. No, that's the Sonyverse.
That's Sony,
But I'm curious to see the multiverse, the madness that they're doing with Doctor Strange. That seems really cool, and Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Well, see, I'm very confident that they'll be able to, like you said, it's not going to be the same. You never can match your first,
No.
but all they have to do is repeat the plan, which is, have good solo movies and give us characters that we can attach to, that we love, and then we'll see the way they wind together. Because, you know, before the end credits on the first Iron Man movie, I didn't know they had any plans for anything further than that. And then when Nick Fury shows up, and I'm like, and I remember that, talk about one of my favorite movie moments. I'm sitting there in the theater, and my girlfriend, she's fairly knowledgeable about a lot of the stuff because she'll watch it if I watch it, but she wasn't the nerd, that I am, and I'm not a super nerd, but I know some things. So I know a few things. So I'm sitting there, and then Sam Jackson gets up. I'm like, that's Nick Fury. I'm like, what are you doing here? Where are we going? And he's talking, and I'm like, this isn't for no reason. And then, as soon as he says, I want to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative, you could tell who were the nerds in my theater because we all were.
And here's the interesting thing about that is that they purposely baited him. They thirst trapped him in the Ultimate series because what they did is that Nick Fury for many, many years so to those who don't know, I'm sure many of you do. You have the mainstream 616 universe, and then you have the Ultimate spin-off series that to made it easier for people like yourself, Kevin, who were just like, where do I get in?
Right.
And in that one, they made Nick Fury black, and they happened to make him look like Nick Cage. So it was fascinating when he came out. I was like, oh, wow, he actually took the bait.
Right.
Exactly. Nick Cage.
Yeah. So no, I get what you're saying. That was real cool. And I remember like right when Iron Man came out and it had this crazy ass weekend at the box office, literally that Monday, Marvel comes out with the box office taking a victory lap and a touchdown dance, rightfully so. But they also give you their movie lineup up until 2011. They said everything except the Avengers movie. They're just like, oh yeah, we got Captain America, we got Thor, we got Incredible Hulk. They didn't say Avengers though.
Yeah. Who all had the original members of the Avengers, but never mind.
Yeah. Well, we're a little bit over time, but that's totally fine because this was amazing. What I would love is for each of you to tell everybody where they can find your books. So Kevin, let's start with you. Where can people find your books and your webcomic?
Okay, well, you can find my books on Amazon, on the Zon, of course. If you want to know more about what I'm doing, you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is WriterGuyKev, WriterKev. I also have my website, which is kevinsorrell.com, KevinSorrell.com. And my webcomic is at AbigailWallerSeries.com. So that's AbigailWaller series.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Eric, what about you? Where can people find you and your books?
My name, I have yet to find another Eric Nunnally on the internet, so it's actually pretty easy to find. Let's see here, is it right there?
Yeah, it's like right in the little corner.
No one else spells it this way. ERRICKNUNNALLY.US is my website. My books are on bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, bookstores. So they're available through the usual systems. And I show up in anthologies, and my last sale was to Faya Literary Magazine, which is doing really well. So I'd love to see people pick up those things as well.
Awesome. Absolutely. And Cece, where can people find you and your books?
Well, you can find me on the Zon. You can find me on Amazon. And I'm exclusive to Amazon there. So that's where you'll find my stuff. I'm also on Facebook. You can find me at CCEKEKE. And you can also find my website is ekeke.com. And you'll just find out a little more about me, some other stuff, and just, the series that I'm writing as well. And I'm also on Instagram at CCEKEKE.
Awesome. Thank you. And everybody, you can also find all of their books on superherofiction.com. That's superhero-fiction.com. And they are the sponsors of this panel. We are going to be continuing the panel series every month with different subjects. And if you want to keep up to date about all of that, you can also subscribe via the website, or just go and browse and find all of their books and get all of their books, because these guys are awesome. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.